you're going to hear this a lot. I've been quite lucky. How does this randomly happen? I feel like I've skipped a couple of steps here.
I always hate being the best in the room.
You're a coward.
Yeah.
Coward. Yeah. Make sure that there's a body of work ready to present and to represent yourself.
Let us get started. Nice to have you on. If you would be able to introduce yourself a little bit to everyone who doesn't know who you are, we can start off with that.
Yeah, sure. My name's Adrian or Jamada. I am a color caster analyst in League of Legends. I've been doing it now for, gosh, coming up on 5 years, which is a bit scary to say. Um, I have to almost consider myself a veteran now. I think it's the way the pecking order goes. And yeah, I'm here today to spend some time with our lovely man Evan.
Thank you very much. No, I wouldn't classify you as a veteran. I'd classify you as just getting started. You're making me think about how much League I've actually played, and I don't want to say the number of hours, but I would like to start with a quote that I quite like, and then that's going to link us into a question. But it is, if you aren't naturally tired at night and excited in the morning, then you haven't found something necessarily meaningful to work on, right? And
Mm.
that for me is something that quite hits home. So I would say my first question to you is, how do you balance that aspect of passion for like casting or hosting with the risk of burnout?
Ooh, it's always kind of just about self-reflection, I think. It was actually something that I dealt with quite early on when I started casting because the very first year that I actually took on casting full time, I was doing the UKLC, rest in peace, but it's almost like kind of halfback with Four Nations, um, the NLC, and then I was doing a couple of guest days here and there on the LEC. But the thing is, the UKLC and the NLC alone were four broadcasts a week. Granted, this was during COVID, so it's not like I was traveling out to places and then having to come back home. I was doing it all from home. But it's still a large quantity of like broadcast work. And that year, actually, I got offered to do guest work on the LPL. Um, and I was already, technically 3 broadcasts, different products, deep, and I turned down the LPL because I was like, if I do the LPL, awesome for my career, and I was definitely very driven, but I was already kind of getting close to. I want burnout's a very strong word for the position I was in, but I was like, I'm working 5 days a week. Oh, scary, I know.
Oh,
Um, but in terms of like the strain on my voice, the overall like passion, I could start to feel it. It was like very early on, it was going from like a passion to a job immediately. And I felt like if I did the LPL at that time, and obviously I was very lucky to then do the LPL a couple of years later, um, it would have definitely turned a lot more into a like slog of feel. So I think maintaining that passion came from just doing the self reflection of I've got my workload. I'm very happy with my workload, um, and just going in that specific instance, doing the LPL would have been lovely, but would it come of the cost of hey, I'm tired, boss? And in that particular time, I felt like it would, so I said no, and that kind of kept the fire there a lot more bright than I feel like it otherwise would have been.
yeah. I mean, I can get behind that. Uh, Especially during the time I think you got offered it was maybe around COVID time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I would say be happy you didn't take that. 3 best of 3s a day would have been
Yeah, it was.
crazy.
I mean, to be fair, what was good about the product at the time was they still did, they still swapped people out throughout the day.
Yeah.
So there'll be days where occasionally it would be 3 pairings of casters, one for each best of 3. Sometimes it'd be split 2-1, right? Um, but I know, like for example, last year they were not granted that mercy. Rest in peace, the LPL English product, but they weren't granted that same mercy. Like the
Oh,
3 best of 3s a day, you were waking up if you're in like the UK at 6 o'clock in the morning, I think would have been cool time, and you were casting until almost 3 o'clock if you were looking at a 9 game days. So um, definitely still heavy amount of workload to take on, especially if it was even 2-3 times a week. Again, especially against the schedule that I was working on in 2021 summer. So yeah, that's how I kept the passion going, and early on, or an example of doing that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I definitely think that's something that a lot of people overlook when it starts to feel like a job or a step towards something like the bigger. Okay, sure, I've casted this like quote unquote lower league, so I can then move up to the LPL, and then it's all kind of that linear line, and it becomes too much sometimes, right? So
Yeah.
how I would add on to that a little bit is like, how do you reconnect with it sometimes? Yes, you can balance that passion with the risk of burnout, but what happens if you're too far gone, right? It's now become a sense of, okay, well, this isn't fun anymore. Now it's just a job. I'm doing this full time. How do you kind of reconnect?
Hmm. Um, I think it's going to be different person to person, right? Um, I'd say one way, because I've definitely been in periods of burnout, or periods where it's just like, man, yeah, this is just a job, right? Like I've lost my passion temporarily. Um, for me, disconnecting for a while, right? From whether it be social media, whether it be the game as a whole, as long as I can actually afford to do it, right? So in my case, I've been very fortunate, um, just by sheer circumstance. Well, fortunate is one way of looking at it. My partner lives in America,
Mm,
so I've been able to go out there, thanks to the freedoms that working in esports has given me. Um, and kind of just turn my brain off, right? Um, and relax, focus on myself, you know, the important things in life to me. Um, and that was kind of what allowed me personally to kind of reconnect, because once you spend a certain time away, then it's like those feelings of, it's almost like withdrawal. It's like, man, I've not cast in a while, or I've not like been in the esports space, or like interacted with my peers, my friends, for a little while, and that drive starts to kind of come back. I think if you maybe don't have that luxury, that at least in my personal experience I've had, I think a certain level of disconnect is definitely still possible in most people's cases. And I think just trying to maybe find other things that either you are passionate about to kind of sink a little bit of time into, whether it's other media, right? Books, TV shows, whether it's maybe learning a new like kind of skill that you've always wanted to do. And that can really range from like pretty much anything. Um, like one thing that I did early on is I used to learn like loads of small like tidbits of different languages,
Ooh.
um, just because I don't know, I like language is cool to me. So like kind of being a bit of a man of the world feels like awesome, being able to say little bits of Mandarin or Japanese or Spanish or French or German. Um, those things like kind of helped me go through like a hey, I've done this learning bit now. Do you know what was cool before I was doing this learning stuff? The casting stuff. I'm gonna go back to it. Um, and yeah, that's kind of one way that where if I've not had those bigger periods of time where I can actually just completely step away, um, then doing those things in downtime, and kind of managing your time like that really helps.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. League of Legends to me is, I'm going to use a little bit of a reference here. It's like the Green Goblin mask in a way.
It
You know,
is. It
when
is.
it's
Yeah.
on the bin, and it's like every time I uninstall the game and say, nah, sod this, I'm not playing it anymore.
It is.
Go away.
Yeah, you're a coward.
Yeah.
Coward. Yeah.
Just starts calling back to me. Put the mask back on. Lock Nunu mid and run it down. Gank 3 times in a minute, you know.
It is. It is what it is. What it does. And I mean, part of like actually a kind of an inverse. And one of the first things that came to mind is whenever I do start to lose passion, funnily enough, I actually start queuing up League more.
Yeah.
Um, because I feel like a big part of my connection to League of Legends, and I'm sure it's like this for a lot of people, right? But it's actually playing the game.
Mhm.
Um, it's a being like an air quotes high elo player. Well, I say air quotes by today's standards, it would be high elo. So, but like season like 6, 7, 8, like being in Diamond One, always being master, and really kind of engrossing myself in playing the game day to day. Um, when I was technically like in your shoes, I was still in what would have been university if it wasn't my gap year. Um, that was what made me passionate about League before. So I think there is still kind of a primal urge in me where it's like, if I start to lose the passion through casting, I can regain it through, playing an ungodly amount of League of Legends.
I mean, we can talk about your League of Legends experience a little bit. I was gonna, segue this on to another thing, but I want to get straight in there. I understand you're a coach, right? Pick Me Galio,
Was.
M&M Gaming, M&M Academy, Lionheart Esports, and then you also, if I am correct, played jungle as a substitute.
Yeah, really weird timeline of events. So this will be one for the old heads of the UK scene. But I happen to know this lovely, lovely fella by the name of Ego Speed. Um, and he I met him through I want to say it was the old game arena tournaments. I'm not sure if they're still running anymore. I do know they ran into some trouble a couple of years ago, so I'm not sure if they're still active. But that tournament was where I met him. He played on Bulldog Esports, and he knew me, and they needed a substitute jungler because the jungler had to be like a certain rank, and they were like, "Yo, get." He was like, "Yo, like I've got a friend called Adrian. Like he could play these two or three games that we needed for." And that was like my introduction to the UK scene and space as a whole. Um, because that's what got me to know a couple of more people. And that really kind of put me on the map of, hey, I had no idea that the UKLC was a thing, that the Forge of Champions was a thing. Um, and that's when I really started to get a lot more involved. Because then shortly after, very fortunately, I think maybe 3.5 or 4 months after that, actually no, a bit longer, it's probably 6 months. The at the time manager of Eminem, who uh, defunct now, but Eminem were the biggest UK organization in League of Legends in 2019, reached out to me. Was like, "Hey, I've seen your interactions on Twitter. I've seen a couple of the UK based podcasts you've been on. I like the way you think. I like the way you talk about the game. Come and be on the coaching staff." And I was like, "Whoa! Like,
Whoa.
how does this randomly happen? I feel like I've skipped a couple of steps here, you know." Um, and I did realistically, through a little bit of luck, but also I feel like I was pretty willing to put in the time anyway. I just feel like the universe decided to reward me immediately instead of giving me some delayed gratification. Um, and yeah, the rest was kind of history. The PMG stuff was really funny. That was just like, because that was last year.
Yeah.
Um, Bunch of friends, right? Couple of streamers, Sanchovies, Nikic. Um, and they needed well, I say needed, they wanted some outside opinion on their gameplay and their teamwork. um
Uh, I know there
so
was
yeah,
so much arguing on that team.
it was so funny. Yeah, no, I do miss them, but uh great bunch, and I still talk to a lot of them now, because it was just that great and fun and experience. So yeah, getting back into the saddle, even if it was for a couple of weeks, was a good and very, very fun time.
Do you feel like the coaching helped you with color casting?
um I think it helped me in one unique way, particularly where I've always been big with coaches when it comes to the difference of just having the knowledge and actually understanding how to pass that knowledge on. And it's effectively like the difference of like, are you a good coach or are you also a good teacher, right?
Yeah.
Um, because I think you can be a good coach and be a bad teacher, and you could probably be a bad coach but be a good teacher, right? Um, so I think the way that I translated some of the skills and like learnings from being a coach was the way that I feel like I explain the game when I'm casting. I take a lot from my coaching where I try and make it as simple to understand as possible without losing the like depth or the nuance of whatever the point is that I'm making. Um, and unlike what you'll probably hear today, a lot less rambling, a lot less, A to G to Y and like back up to A. Um, really trying to like keep it concise, but again, like very digestible for the viewer. Otherwise, though, the actual craft is obviously just it's a completely different beast, right?
Mm.
Um, but coaching definitely helped me in that specific part of like explanation and trying to keep it really condensed, but again, still very understandable.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, coaching especially, you have to put so much time into prep and learning the game and stuff like that. So I feel like maybe in a way, casting and coaching are quite cohesive with, for instance, the prep days.
I would say so. There's a it's like yes, you have like a lot of prep for like coaching, or rather for casting. I think it's just like the again, like you're kind of hinting to and alluding to, it's the application of it all. Um,
Yes, absolutely.
and um, I think for me the biggest part was just probably how I actually approached my personal like self review as a caster. Because what I ended up doing is applying a lot of the principles that I would use with players when I was coaching to then myself. Um, in the early stages. The only thing is definitely a little bit more difficult casting if you don't have like the correct kind of people and peers around you
Mm,
um, to actually actively improve because there's no like guide to being a good caster. Um, you kind of just learn as you go, to be
yeah,
honest with you. Um, and it's only really when you like sit down with people who have a lot more experience than you a lot of the time, or once you do have that experience, just sitting down with people that you respect or are stronger in certain aspects of the
yes,
craft than you are,
absolutely.
to really kind of siphon their knowledge. You steal it in
Yeah,
many ways, but obviously it's a very productive and back and forth conversation with those people to improve doing what you love, because the craft is about entertainment as much as it is education when it comes to the analyst part. um and that's what drives a lot of us, I feel like.
yeah. I mean, I'm definitely gonna agree with you on the fact that when you're around people who are better, you definitely siphon and steal their aspects. I mean, there was a study recently that I looked into when you're around people that are better than you in something, whether that be traditional sports, something like running, or whether that even be like esports, where it's like, okay, I'm competing in like a League of Legends division, right? If you're
Yep.
around people who are statistically better than you in something, your performance increases by 15%. Apologies. But
Wow.
if you're around people who are negative and they don't really put as much drive and determination into it, your performance actually decreases by around 30. So it's like if you want to improve on something, surround yourself with people who are better, right?
Wow, those obviously like the numbers on that feel crazy, but also when you kind of think about it, yeah. I mean, there's always the thing of, especially in esports, and I'll use a team example, HLE in the LCK. They have a bit of a
Oh,
moniker of
yeah.
playing to the level of their opponent, like a lot, right? You'll see them struggle with low end teams like your Bros and DNFs of the world, but then they'll go toe to toe with Gen G on their good days. So I that feels applicable in many many different places. Um, but it's totally correct. And I feel like even thinking about my own personal journey early on, I was very, very fortunate with the people that I was surrounded by, because I had a bunch of veterans. I had Hiprain, who had already been casting for
Ooh.
years. And that was like my main casting partner for the first year and a half of my career, 2 years of my career. Um, Orcs, who's obviously on the LCK now, he was the main reason why I got into the UK space at all as a caster. Uh, because he was the one that I reached out to. He was the one that told me what to do to like get an opportunity. I went and did it. He was like, okay, let me see what I can do. When I spoke to management, and I ended up getting chances on the UKLC after that. But he was obviously a veteran, and he was an ex-pro player, ex-scoundrel who, gosh, I'm not sure where ex-scoundrel is now. I just know he's busy being a father. But that even by those times, he was already a veteran, and being surrounded by like honestly just those three, and I could really list off far more people than just those three. Um, they really prepared me for the journey I then went on post that, and I've been on now. So uh I could totally see that, like being surrounded by the right kind of people. And that's been applicable for every year, because I feel like every year I've kind of fallen up in many ways with the amount of talent that I've been able to just surround myself with. Um, it's really taught me many different things. Not just even in casting, to be honest, but obviously in casting too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, stuff like that, I like to add a little bit of meaning to. Personally, what I like to do is I always hate being the best in the room. Can never stand it, right? I'd always prefer to be the worst in the room because I know if people are statistically better than me, it's like, okay, well, I can work towards that. And I think that's applicable with casting quite heavily because if you're going broadcast to broadcast, you need to be swapping those partners, right? So I'll segue on a little bit. I know from a play-by-play point of how you link with your color caster. As a color caster, how do you kind of get that team cohesion with your play-by-play?
Ooh, again, you're gonna hear this a lot. I've been quite lucky because a lot of the a lot of the play-by-plays, almost every play-by-play that I've worked with for like extensive periods of time, I either kind of ended up knowing beforehand, or we just immediately clicked. And I think that's kind of a part of me thing because I would like to call myself a pretty easy to work with person. I don't really have a lot of like parameters. I don't need my coffee doesn't need to be like, you know what I mean. I don't need like 3 pumps of caramel and then this that. It's just I want to come in, do the job, have fun. Um, and a lot of the time, I think that kind of mantra overall has kind of helped in making sure that those relationships are always quite easygoing. And then also like on a more professional level, definitely holding each other to account of what we say, right? So, if we set certain goals for a cast, we make sure that we try and uphold that standard that we're looking for in those casts, right? Um, and that sense of trying to improve, whether it be game to game, series to series, week to week, I think also helps. So there's no like real special sauce there. I feel like, um, again, I consider myself relatively easy to work with, and I think I've also been blessed with, many easy to work with play by plays, but also like incredibly talented play by plays. Basically every single broadcast I've stepped into.
Yeah, I think that's something to go on a bit with. You're not like the fancy type of sauces you get on your meal. You're the basic kind of like tomato ketchup and mayonnaise type stuff. No, but I know you talked about being a bit lucky and stuff when you started within the UK scene, but
Mm,
I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that because the UK scene is expanding in a lot on like a linear but upwards line at the same time.
sure.
It's quite grassroots and uncertain as soon as you get out of that like college and university league because you have like British Esports who do the college side, and then you have like NSC and Null who do the university. But as soon as you're out of that, how did you navigate like going around casting?
Oh, so I didn't take the what is now I think considered the traditional path, right? Like I said, I kind of got scooped off the streets by Eminem, and that kind of turned into its own like casting journey, kind of further on down the line. Um, but I think that the the way that it kind of gets navigated now is going to be kind of strange because I feel like in the UK scene it is very grassroots, yes, but I feel like the upwards mobility is quite tight. I think it's quite constrained. And this has always been a thing, like no matter the period of time that we've been in. But it's obviously gotten better and worse depending on what time of, esports you've been in. So like when I got into the space in 2019, um, there was a lot of flexibility on the broadcast of, they on the UK scene, UKLC rather, they had I think 4 main spots because you had the host who was like Scoundrel, but this is the thing: 3 of these spots are basically non-moving, right? You'd have Orcs, then you have Hitbrain, and then you have like one rotating analyst slot. So there wasn't really a space for a play-by-play at the time, and I think in 2019, to the best of my knowledge, until the UKEL came around, there wasn't actually another broadcast in the UK space to like kind of provide that space for up and coming casters. Whilst like Newell and NSC did exist, um, they were a lot more disconnected from the what is now I would a much more considerate pipeline to the UKLC. Unlike today, where like the Four Nations is a lot more kind of tied into the ecosystem of the NLC um, as a whole, right? And then we did go through after 2019 a much better period of time where for like up and coming casters, where you had the NLC, yes, but then you had the NLC Division Two um, for a while, which actually did rotate people in quite frequently. But again, and this is something that depending on where we go in this conversation, you'll learn is a lot of these things are outside of the control of the casters entirely because it's managerial decisions, right? It's talent
Yeah.
managers who pick who's on these products, um, which is why again there's no real one answer to what you're saying of how do you navigate it. It's like you pretty much if you get into a position where you're on a frequent broadcast, that's good. Um, you don't really have control of where you go beyond putting yourself out there
Yeah.
into the wider space, right? What I mean by that is tweeting, social media, engaging in discourse that is, let's say in the direction of where you want to go, right? So, uh, not that I was actively doing this on purpose, but because I was engaging in UK space discourse and UKLC discourse, it then eventually meant that that's how I got my opportunity, right? Like that was realistically what got me recognized in the space. So if you're, working on Newell or you're working on NSC and you want to be a part of the NLC ecosystem, start watching those like leagues and those games and like commentating, uh, making commentary on Twitter or maybe do VOD reviews or and upload them and really kind of put yourself out there because that's realistically the best chance that you have. And then it's reaching out to people on those broadcasts and
Yeah.
really trying to engage directly a little bit more with the talent. And I mean, I can speak for myself, and I feel like I'm speaking for a fair few of my peers. Most of the time, if you reach out to us, we will just respond and give you pretty candid answers about what you're asking. Um, but that's more or less the best way because I feel like the upward mobility coming out of these spaces right now is very difficult. I mean, hell, even from the perspective of being on the NLC, I think if your goal is to be on a tier one broadcast, the upper mobility is very tough as well. Because in terms of English speaking opportunities, they are quite limited, right? I don't want to go too far beyond the scope of your question, which is obviously a lot more UK focused. Um, but that is kind of the deal, right? The mobility is very constrained, and there's not really too much that you can do about that constraint. But what you can do is obviously up the chances of you gaining an opportunity once an opportunity is like there and present to try and seize.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I'm a very quotey person, but that was because how I was raised in a bit. And something I live a lot by, I used to hate this as a kid, this quote. Every time I'd have to study for an exam or have to do an importance thing, it was you get out what you put in.
Yeah,
100%. It's so important in aspects that I think when it comes to casting and stuff like that of okay, well, if I want to get into this bigger league of okay, well, let's say tier one, for example, I can't just float my boat in over to that type of aspect. I've got to live the lifestyle to get into it.
yeah. To a point, absolutely. You do need to like yeah engross yourself a little bit in that, right? Like the amount of games, for example, let's say the LPL English product officially still exists. Obviously there is the unofficial English broadcast now, shout out those guys, they're lovely. um Also I miss you, Mazel's probably never going to hear this, but um you know watching the games, engaging in any discourse going on around those particular series, that's effectively what you kind of have to do and what you should do, I feel. um and like you're saying, kind of air quotes living in that lifestyle ish is definitely the pathing that is going to be most beneficial to you in the
Yeah.
long run, because otherwise it's just yeah you can't really just get by sheer luck of existing. um I did again. I rolled 20s for like 4.5 years straight. And I can certainly acknowledge that. Um, though I still did my due diligence. I still did a lot of work. I still made sure, that craft wise and also analytically, I felt, up to snuff all as frequently as I could. Um, so yeah, that's definitely a big part of it as well. Putting in as much as putting in everything that you can will see some return, but it's not always going to be proportionate. And I think that's one
Yeah.
thing that people will struggle with a lot of the time. Um, and definitely, even I've gone through that struggle a bit too, where I feel like I've put in more than I then eventually got out. But it also presents itself in other ways. It's not just like opportunities, it's people, it's connections and all of these different things that will kind of pop up and potentially, yield some kind of return, whether it be financial, whether it again be like opportunity or just like meeting people. Like, I've met so many people through esports simply by putting myself out there and not just floating my boat. And that in of itself is also I consider a return, right? Because you can't replace people at the end of the day, right? Um, well, unless you're a corporation, but you can't replace people on a one-to-one, right? So I value those connections and those people that have been brought into my life through what you're talking about, like not just
Yeah.
kind of being idle and trying to put yourself out there.
Yeah, you kind of answered my question, my next one. It
Oh,
was
sure.
gonna be, the aspect of freelance is quite heavy, right? It's a
Mhm.
lot of what you have to do. Yes, you can get lucky like some people have, but it comes with a lot of unpredictability and instability, right? So a lot of people talk about that if you want to be quote unquote successful or get up to a league like the LEC or LPL, everything comes with a lonely chapter, right? So
It can, yeah. It,
when it comes to casting, I was going to ask, how did
mhm.
you get through that lonely chapter?
Gosh, goes back to the self-reflection stuff, really. Um, yeah, sometimes it can feel very isolating. I think it's a mix of again self-reflection, but then what's good about the pool of people that are present now is they're just bloody lovely. Like you can talk to anyone and they will give you their time of day in that space. And I think that's something that really just about everyone really kind of does is support each other. Um, so that if you are feeling that kind of loneliness in the space and that isolation that does come with freelancing, I could reach out to anyone and they will be like, hey, like da 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 da, to paraphrase, and it will help. It will definitely help you get through that. And um, yeah, I think it's always going to approach people in different ways, that isolation, and it's going to challenge you in very obtuse ways as well, I think. Um, but it's just about the navigation of it, really. And to me, I think a lot of that just comes through talking with the people that you already work with, because at least in my case, being almost always the youngest in any given environment, because believe it or not, I've turned 26 this year, which I know might seem like I might seem like a dinosaur to you. Um, but what that meant in terms of my career as I went through it is I was almost always the youngest person on the team, unless Gorborg was there, because well, even then Gorborg's actually a little bit older than me, but by a couple of months. So, you know, um, that was how that kind of ended up working. So I always felt like I could rely on someone with a lot more wisdom and experience than me to help guide me through those times whenever I felt like I did go through them.
Yeah, I actually really quite like that answer. It like leaning on the people you know and stuff like that, especially when I mean, if you're in a league like the LEC, I think you have that stability, but when you're trying to make that jump, which I'm going to segue onto, is
Sure.
how did you prepare with that quote unquote fear of I know you in your personal attire swapped leagues a lot. Like you did the NLC and then you went to the like UKEL, UKLC, LPL. So how did you, mentally and practically deal with that fear of going to bigger leagues?
There's no amount of preparation that really makes you feel comfortable. Um, there's only really a scale, right? Of feeling unprepared and feeling completely unprepared and feeling lightly unprepared. I feel like is the 1 to 100. Um, and I think it's only really once you get your hands and feet dirty that you actually go, oh, okay, that wasn't that bad. Um, and I think once I caught on, and I fortunately caught on quite early. Um, I never really dealt with nerves, swapping leagues like that. Um, After a little while, I think once I'd done a couple of days, um, I think the two tournaments early on that really kind of shifted that mentality for me were EU Masters, and then because it's effectively the Champions League of the ERLs, right? And then the LPL, and the first couple of times I did the LPL, because the overall reception to me being present on that league was just so overwhelmingly positive that it kind of robbed my ability to feel fear afterwards. Like even less than I think a year, maybe about a year, maybe 3 months or something added. I went and did EU Masters finals in Montpellier, France, in 2023, and that was in a venue with I want to say 10,000 people, and that is
Wow.
one an experience I will never forget, but two, I I didn't feel nervous start to finish. Um, and that wasn't because of my experience per se. It was just, it's just another day in the office. Like it eventually just gets to that point where it's like the work doesn't change. It's just the environment around you does.
Mm,
Um, and that was really what kind of helped me. Obviously, sitting down and prepping and doing VOD review, it helps you feel more comfortable. And I think
yeah,
that's
100%.
that's like the core and maybe the essence of the answer of what you're looking for in this question. Um, but I think for a lot of people, there isn't really any amount of prep that you can do that will fully make you comfortable until
Yeah.
you've gone and put the headset on and you've cast one game and then you take it off again and you go, wow, okay. Why was I so scared in the first place? It's if you've been doing it for a little while, it's another game. It's just the nameplates are different. Um, so yeah, prep helps, but it doesn't solve the issue, I think, until you've really again gotten your hands and feet dirty.
Yeah, you gotta get stuck in the mud a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But no, something I would like to ask is, as soon as you've taken that headset off and away, yeah, you're stuck in the mud, but how does your casting environment change? I know how it's adapted as a play-by-play, right? But how does
Mhm.
it change your casting environment? How do you adapt to it when you're a color?
Um, I don't know. It's not something I've ever really considered. Um, I think for me, the like again, I almost in some ways I kind of block out the environments. If I feel like it's gonna make me feel nervous, which again is very, very rare, um, as I've kind of gained a lot more tenor. Definitely the first couple of years, like first time doing EMEA Masters, or it was back then it was known as EU Masters. Um, I tried to just kind of ignore it for what it was, work the job, and then once I've taken the headset off, then acknowledge, oh yeah, like this was this was EMEA. Or I remember that I think the first weekend that I was able to go to the LEC studio after COVID, I think it was 2022. It was actually probably around 3 years ago. We're in the middle of July as of recording, so uh, it was probably around 3 years ago on the dot. Uh, I just I went in, I did the work, and then I remember sitting in the hotel room and going, wow, like 5 years ago, I was watching basically everyone that I worked with on the screen today, as like a 16, 17-year old going, wow, I love League of Legends. And then I got to participate in it actively, the actual, production of it all. Um So that's how I dealt with it personally. It was just kind of a try and focus on the job and not so much the environment. Now, the obvious drawback is if you go too deep into that tunnel, maybe you miss some pretty lovely sights on the way. So
Yeah.
I think there's a balance to strike, for sure. Like I brought up the Montpellier thing. Um, I still took the time to breathe in the fact that whilst necessarily I wasn't casting in front of 10,000 people because it wasn't in-house. France has the weird laws where public information needs to be in French. So the in-house is in French, but I was still like, I'll take the headset off, turn around, and there's 10,000 people watching the game that I'm currently commentating over, and they're soaking in this environment and this
Wow.
atmosphere, and the game too. So um, yeah, it's in that regard with what I'm saying, a balance still has to be met. Otherwise, I feel like as the saying goes, you're not gonna smell the flowers, right? You're never gonna be able to really
Yeah.
take in the beauty of something. So that's really the way that I dealt with it.
100%. Smell the flowers, keep it in the current, make sure you enjoy everything. Don't take it a little too seriously. I mean, you wouldn't be there if they didn't want you there, right? But something I would like to say is you talked about, your 16, 17-year-old self having that passion for League, right? So what
Yeah.
is your personal why behind casting? What keeps you excited to do it day after day because you've been doing it for that, as you said, veteran time?
Yeah. Um, honestly, as I've gone further and deeper into my tenor, a lot of it is just about the interaction with the community. Um, at first there was like an air of I feel like arrogance, and when you're younger, I think that's kind of natural. Where it's like, oh my god, like I'm in front of this camera with all these people and looking at me, and I think it's pretty natural for a lot of people to feel quite self-centered in those kind of situations to begin with. But for me now, it's that community feel of like not uh not being able to not go anywhere because that makes it sound like I'm famous. I'm not. But like if I'm at a league event, people will stop me and go, "Hey, aren't you da 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 da?" da?" I'm like, "Yeah, hey, what's up, man?" And like to me, in those kind of spaces, being able to be a part of the reason why someone's day is like even better than it potentially could be is like frankly that's enough for me, right?
Mm.
Um, so stuff like that keeps me going. Going to I had this conversation recently actually with Al Domine and Digon on Power Spike because Dom went to Vancouver for MSI, and that was the first time that he'd been to a live league event. I think, in his words, in a decade, which that speaks to how old he is.
Wow.
Um, but um, he and I think it's very easy to get sucked into like negative comments when you're wholly online. Um, but I think he forgot that he is actually quite loved in the community by a large amount of people. And I think it's easy, even also as a caster, in that same vein, to forget that you are a core part of a lot of the experience that people go through watching the broadcast. Because at the end of the day, you know, every faker shockwave has some legendary like medic or Captain Flowers call over it or
Yeah,
Dracos call
100%.
over it. Just as much as Cage will drop in the F bomb when Guma stole the Baron in Worlds 2022. So those moments all elevate the sport that you know we get to enjoy. Um, so I feel like like getting to be a portion of why someone's day feels better in those kind of spaces, whether it be at the LEC studio, whether it be at like a LAN or uh, hell, like even World's Finals last year here in London was incredible for this exact reason. Um, just the connection of hey, we all love this sport. This is why we're here. Um,
100%.
that's probably the biggest driver for me.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you made me laugh as soon as you started talking about I Will Dominate because I remember there was a clip in Vancouver when Shox was interviewing someone and she said, "Oh, that's
Oh,
that's
yeah.
the."
It was gosh, I've forgotten his name, but he's an Asian co-streamer himself. He was
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, I've been watching I Will Dominate for many, many years." And Eve just goes, "Wow, we found the one I will dominate fan in the building." Um, yeah, just great shithousery from Shocks, and yeah,
Bro,
no,
I was
Dom took it like a champ.
as soon as I saw that, I was laughing for about 10 minutes just straight. Forgotten what I was gonna say. No, to segue on from me just starting to, laugh a little bit too much. No, I completely understand, that aspect of doing it for the community. I had talk about myself a little bit here, but I had someone
Go
come
ahead.
up to me recently, and it was my first ever like recognized at a current event of casting, and he
Mm.
came up to me and was like, "Oh, you're the person who did blah 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 blah," and I was like, "Oh yeah, that is." He was like, "Oh, can I get a photo?" I was like, "Whoa, whoa, what's going
Yeah,
on here?"
it feels weird, doesn't it? It
Yeah,
does
it
feel
felt
weird at
really
first.
weird.
Yeah. But again, the way that I process those like moments of feelings is, wow, okay, like one, okay, get past the weird part. I probably just played a part in making that person's day feel like cooler than it already probably was, right?
Yeah.
And that's where like for me the joy in like kind of the later parts of this journey I'm on right now, it comes from. It's that.
Yeah, 100%. Now, something I would like to talk about with layers is yes,
Mm.
you have casted LPL, yes, you have casted LEC, but that aspect of success and reward keeps on building. So,
Yeah.
what is still on your personal bucket list for casting?
Well, an international somehow would be cool. I unfortunately missed the train on MSI in
Oh
2023,
no.
which I think is very sad, obviously, and I think I wouldn't say it's weighed on me heavily because that would make it sound a lot more serious than it is. Um, but obviously, when you are in a craft with the kind of mobility that this job can come with, um, it does feel in some ways like bad, right? And then obviously this year with the LPL broadcast kind of nuked, and the way that the kind of landscape of the industry lies with the LEC, like as an example, you may have noticed this year if you frequent the LEC, they haven't had any guests on who aren't already in Berlin, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Um, so in terms of expenses and things like that, the cost and the overall uh the costs, yeah, are definitely being cut, and that is one of the ways that they're trying to keep things as cheap as they can in terms of running the league. So uh I'm unsure, but the international, if I can somehow do it, just one, even if it's just play-ins, just that feel of being on a road trip, right? I've always loved, and EMEA has been able to provide that for me, EU Masters, a couple of times. Um, but I think it's different when it's internationals because that's when you also get to, you know, uh, mingle with people from around the world who also do the same job as you, right? A big part, I say I missed out on MSI 2023. I did the broadcast. I did actually go and do stage hosting work, which was very new to me and still is new to me now because I've never done it since. Um, but still being able to like hang out with all the people that I work with normally, plus the people that I would typically only get to see through a screen from, what is now LTA North, but then LCS and the LCK. Um, that was still like fun and a big part of that experience. But wanting that experience again, but actually through focusing on working on the same product is really what I'd say is still on the bucket list. Will it get ticked? I don't know. Such as the joys and the fun of being a freelancer, right? Um, but I could still say that even if that never happens, I feel quite fulfilled in my career and what I've done in these last couple of years. And I'm still getting to enjoy a lot of those benefits through the NLC to a point now where, with the streaming teams that we've had in, with Cadril, Dom, and obviously the Nord teams too. Um, I missed Copenhagen because of Medic and his inability to not get married on the same weekend. Uh, but there's obviously Stockholm, which was announced a couple of days ago, which I'm looking forward to going to because I've never been to Sweden. So that would be a nice opportunity to hopefully take in some sights, whilst also again, new culture, new environment, and then obviously working the event itself.
Yeah, I feel like with internationals, that's such a big why, I think, to everyone, especially when we talk about stuff like community. You know,
Mm.
you probably remember either the first person that came up to you and asked for a photo recently, like I did, or even the aspect of, casting the LEC, getting tons of people watching the broadcast, and then, they're all colliding over one game. It probably feels really nice, especially as you're the person doing it. But something I would like to, segue onto a little bit more. You talked about freelance. We've talked about freelance a little bit because it's a bit scary and sometimes, especially for people just getting into the scene in a way. So when we focus on the UK scene, do you think it's improving in offering stability for casters, or is the grinding and aspect still quite real?
The grinding aspect is still very real. I think between 2019 and maybe 2022, it was improving relative to the time. Again, I think like the addition of like layered leagues really helped. So whether it be the UKEL, or then what was the NLC Division 2, which then also had the UKEL below it and a bunch of the other Telia League. Um, those were leagues which technically there were opportunities to get experience in. Um, I think after 2022, and from 2022 until honestly very recently, um, I think it became a lot grindier for a multitude of different factors. Um, I think the mobility really, really just got hamstringed during that period of time, and I think now is probably the first time, since that period of time where I can say it's definitely improving, but the grind is still very real, and there's no guarantee of upward mobility. Um, there are very limited spaces. I mean, hell, even if you like to be candid for a moment, if you look at the NLC, right, as it is in its current form, from a pure freelance like you have effectively 4 spots for analysts, where you've got 2 analyst desk slots, 1 color caster slot, and then realistically, the cap is 2 play-by-plays on that broadcast because otherwise play-by-plays don't really get worked enough, right? So in that space, you have 6 opportunities to obviously weighted towards analysts. So you then have to grind, and then not only do you have to grind, you have to hope that changes happen, and then you have to hope that you're selected in those changes too. So um, it's always going to be quite difficult to find that upward mobility. But again, the only thing that you can really do is your best to be out there and in the space and recognizable, even if you're not tied to that product directly. Um, and then if changes do come around, and in fairness, changes do come around quite frequently below tier one. Hope that you are the one selected through hard work and merit, because another kind of very much spoken about amongst everyone really, point, and especially you see it spoken about in team aspects, like actual like teams in the league, is a lot of it is also who you know, right? um whether whether you like it or not, that will always be one of the overruling factors, is you know whatever impression you've left with XYZ person can and very much will influence whether or not you get employed in
Yeah.
certain situations. Um and sometimes it's weird because even as a freelancer, you will be approached by like a manager and someone will go, "Hey, we're looking at this person. What do you think?" And it's like in that singular moment, you then effectively become the interviewer of that person, right? And it's not to say that we have final say over who joins a team, but good talent managers will ask for feedback from the people that they're currently already employing, because they'll know that we'll know about people who are on the up and coming, and whether or not you know they look like they're working hard, they have the fundamentals of the craft down, and all of these different aspects. um so that's why I say it's important to be out there and not just present only on, what you're working on. Make sure that there's a body of work ready to present and to represent yourself. Because it only strengthens the argument of, if you're coming out of Newell as an example, and maybe the pipeline, I think at the moment probably looks something like, the university leagues, 4 nations if you're like obviously an English speaker, and then from 4 nations, hopefully up to the NLC. Um, whoever's making decisions on 4 nations, I would imagine it's Synergy, I think, because he's probably the product manager on that. Um, you have a strong argument because you have this A, body of work from university, and then B, clear and defined and outlined interest in the league, because they can see your tweets, they can see your VOD reviews, they can see your interactions on Twitter, this, that, the other, and that like helps drive again the scales in your favor, instead of just showing up, doing the university work, and then hoping that's enough.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with having work present and then being able to, if someone asks that question, kind of go snap, snap, snap. This is what I have. This is, what I think I need to be able to show you. For instance, I had one of my friends help me with making a casting sheet. So I
Mm,
have an Excel spreadsheet of every single cast I've done, what the name of it was, what the date, how many hours I've been on it, what role I was doing on it, and like any notes I have for myself. So as soon as someone asks for like casting experience, I can either show them my casting reel or
yeah,
straight, yeah, here,
I
have a
I
look at
actually think
all of the work.
on top of that, one thing I really urge, and I kind of wish I did it, because now I'm a little bit too self-critical, so I feel like I'll never be able to have a show reel that I'm happy with. But one, I've actually never
Yeah.
had a show reel. But two, um, if you feel happy about a cast, write that down. Write down what game it was. Write down what league it happened in. Write down when it happened, because you might want to go and return to that. Or if you're in an event where you're like me and you don't have a show reel now, I'm at a point where I'm fortunate and my experience and my name carries me through a fair amount of employment. But people will still ask me for, your most recently casted game, or again, some representation a la a show reel of what you do and what you can do. But write down those games where you feel good, so you can go back and reference them. Right? If you feel like that was you know a 8.5 or up in terms of performance, in terms of craft, keep that noted. That is so important to do, because I I can't count on both my hands how many games I've walked out of and thought, man, that was awesome. I wouldn't be able to recall any of them right now on the spot. It just wouldn't happen. But if I went back and watched them, I'd be like, yeah, I was on fire this day. Like, I'm calling out this, I'm calling out that. I'm flowing really well in the conversations with my peers. All of these different aspects of the craft, where when you're looking at in that kind of you know, artist eye, you'll immediately notice. But at least in my case, I forget all the time, and I feel like a lot of people probably will. And when you cast as many games as occasionally, you will, where I go back and reference that summer of 2021, where I was talking about burnout. If I was working 4 broadcasts a week, that meant that I was covering upwards of 20 games a week. If I'm casting all 20, which occasionally would happen, you wouldn't be able to ask me to select what my favorite game was to cast out of that from just a pure craft perspective. It's not gonna happen. So
Oh,
bottom line, write it down. Like if you're starting out, write down those games so you can go back to them, and hell, maybe if you need to make a casting reel, which is a very, very useful thing to have, then you have a list of games where there is good content to go and glean from, instead of having to go, oh man, damn, what was this like really cool game that I cast a couple of months ago? You'll just have it at reference immediately.
yeah. Instead of being like, oh man, I wish I would have had that. It's like, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
instantly, clips on my Twitter or YouTube Short or whatever. But when it comes to employment, how important do you think being humble is, showing respect and having no ego?
It is one of the most important things you can really have, I think, in the space. I don't think I've ever been particularly egotistical or like overly arrogant. Um, but it was one thing that was very immediately kind of demonstrated to me verbally by my peers. Like I said, I joined a very, very tenured team when I first started casting, and they were all like, "We like you because you're chill." And I was like, "What? What do you mean?" And it's like, "You don't have any ego." I was like, "Oh, is that a problem that you run into with new casters?" And everyone just like kind of nodded and was like, "Yeah." Like it's a very, very common thing. Um so yeah, not being egotistical, and what would like maybe presenting as egotistical look like, it would be not taking feedback well, right?
Yeah.
If someone gives you feedback, even if you disagree with it, just acknowledge it. Just be like, okay, I hear what you're saying, I'll look into it, right? Even that is better than just going, I don't know, I don't think so, and then like trying to battle, that feedback, especially if it's coming from someone who's a little bit more experienced than you, because at the end of the day, one, your perspective is your perspective. Two, they will be looking at it probably a lot more constructively than you were anyway in the moment. So even if you're going to take it with a pinch of salt, still take it with a pinch of salt and actually just listen to what's being said to you.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that, like, not being egotistical, showing up with humility and just kind of accepting that, hey, like, there will always be something that someone is better than you at anyway. Just take said feedback and see if it, like, apply it sometimes. See if it well, not sometimes, like, genuinely, I tend to try and apply every bit of feedback I get just to see how it feels, right? Um, that might not work for everyone. That's just a personal thing of mine. But yeah, it's super important, because if you're egotistical, or you're uh, you know, by extension likely difficult to work with, that is something that people catch on to very quickly,
Yes. 100%.
and people don't like to work with people who are hard to work with, and that's something that extends beyond League of Legends and freelancing, but
Yeah.
especially as freelancers and contractors. We would much rather a smoother ride, even if you know you're like a hard worker, or you do provide a lot. People would still probably prefer someone who's easier to work with but maybe a little bit worse at the job, than someone who's very difficult to work with, but like objectively better. So to answer your question, yes, it's very, very important.
No, something I've heard before and I've resonated quite a bit with is conversations don't happen on the speaker's terms, it's the listeners. So no
Mm.
matter how well you try to put something across, even if you aren't an egotistical person, it can still come out as it, right? So that's kind of why I don't really understand how people have ego as a new caster. It's like if you're going into a business, you've been hired as a freelance, like surely you got to show utmost respect there, no?
There's so many variables to it, right? It's always going to be dependent on the person. I've I feel like there is, especially like in online spaces, there is like a desire to always want to be right about
Yeah.
any given thing. Um, and there's a long list of things that I could bring up, probably too controversial for this podcast,
Ah,
as to why that might be. But I think those aspects are definitely bled down to even simpler things, right? Where it's the very infamous like pancakes and waffles tweet, where it's like you say you like pancakes, and then the other person will go, "What? So you hate waffles then? Like, is that what's really going on?" Um, and I think a lot of that is why we get, not situations like, but what you're kind of alluding to, where that humility is super important in these kind of situations when you're new, especially.
yeah, you don't want to be a kiss up 100%, but you want
No.
to more be kind of respectful, go introduce yourself, say like,
Mhm.
oh, thank you for giving me the chance, make sure that you work hard, and then just, be a good person, especially if you're getting paid. Like,
Yeah.
something that I found out the hard way recently was if you are getting paid for a cast, make sure you are putting effort in, because if not, it just sounds a bit wishy-washy in the nicest way.
Yeah. No, it does, right? I think it's the least you can do as a contractor. Um, your job. um,
Yeah.
it's like you're being paid for one thing. Do that one thing at least well. And whilst you're at it, if you're in a team, try and make your team's life, you know, simpler too by just focusing on the job and doing it as well as you can and as cohesively as you can. Otherwise, again, it's just going to lead to future situations where there'll be conversations going on that you don't know about and your name's being chucked around, and all it takes is one or two people just going nah, and then you don't get to be a part of that potential a bit of work, yes, but then also experience and this and that and the other that you probably would have enjoyed, but because you couldn't keep one or two things in check, which were very easy to keep in check, uh yeah, you land not inside the circle.
Yeah, I feel like especially in the like enterprise aspect of esports, it's so important that your personality is your brand. Like in other stuff, you have your face as your brand, or you
Mhm.
have your actions as your brand. But I think personality is where it like hits the nail on the head within esports, because you can just be like, you don't know half of the conversations that are happening behind your back, even if it's just like, okay, yeah, well, I really like this guy. You won't know, right? And you can just be dropped in an aspect of 2 seconds.
Yeah. um the personality thing is something that's particularly big and continue to grow as a far more important aspect of as we've kind of gone on in uh, esports. I think especially because the original, just to take it a little bit wider scope first, is like it was originally about the teams and the organizations, right? It wasn't really about necessarily individual players. Players were always very important to this, obviously, because without them, we wouldn't have the teams in the first place. Um, but as time's gone on, and I think the obvious example of this is like T1 and how they've branded their players over the years, and how in some ways, and I mean in football, like 'cause I can actually say this because it's like a predominantly like it will be English speakers and like British people listening. Like in football, we always say like no one's bigger than the club, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Um, but I think in some ways, in like an example of T1, they've gone so far down this marketing rabbit hole that you know uh, the players are actually in some ways bigger than the club. Faker's obviously an exception because Faker is almost bigger than the game, let alone T1. Um, but I bring that up as a nod to your question of yeah, like your personality is effectively, I'm not going to say your worth, but when it's conflated with brand, and obviously brand has value, then how you present yourself and how you interact with people, how you hell just not even just how you interact, but just like down to the finer details of how you treat people, right? Like your pleases and your thank yous and this and that, like very very important on the bigger scale once you start to get to that bigger scale perhaps. So um I think people undervalue it quite a lot, especially casters when we first start out. We're not thinking about, brand power and what to do in terms of these extracurriculars of social media. We're thinking about the game, but social media is such a big part of uh the the work that you do, right? I mean, it's been a very big underlying tone of what I've been talking about, where I've been saying get yourself out there. Almost 80% of that get yourself out there has been what? Interacting on social media, right? Being present in those discourses, streaming, whatever it may be. Uh, so yeah, it's very important, and I think the value of that also reflects the kind of work and the jobs that you can get, right? Um, Two, it is also intrinsically tied to your value as a freelancer and a contractor. Your personality, your brand, the logistics of it too, like the numbers, even if it feels almost a little bit like, Black Mirror-y, that one episode where like your entire worth is valued through how many followers you have on a social media platform. But that is a
Oh,
part of, you know, uh the experience, right? Whether you're particularly fond of it or not. Um, so you do have to play the game a little bit, right? You have to be present um in those spaces because it will also help you down the line if you are a hard worker and you're sincere anyway. It's just another additional potential bonus down the line.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I know, especially if we look at it from a traditional sports aspect, I know some people, the older generation especially, who refuse to watch a football game based on the fact that they do not like the pundits or
Mm.
something like that. And that can especially be applied to esports with the fact that, okay, well, maybe someone doesn't like a caster, so they won't watch that game. That happens. It's very real. And it may not be just because they don't like their casting style that happens. People won't like everything, you're gonna have to deal with it, but they can purely just not like the personality, and it's gonna have an effect.
It can. Yeah, it definitely can. And I also feel like that's a part of the reason why like co-streams also became so popular because you know you're additionally offered like another perspective which isn't necessarily the core broadcast and perspective
Yeah.
and the narrative that's provided there. Um, so yeah, it's super important, and it's not to mean that you need to be agreeable and you can't be opinionated, and you have to follow the status quo on what is the common popular belief at the time. Like as an example, I've been very outspoken about my dislike of Fearless Draft, right? Um, on Twitter, which has definitely stirred a lot of strong emotions amongst the
Ooh.
community, to say the least. Um, but that doesn't mean that all of a sudden all of my other opinions are invalid, or that I'm, barred from making opinion pieces or coming out with statements further on down the line. Doesn't mean that people might tap out and not necessarily want to listen to a cast of mine. I mean, if people feel that emotionally tied to Fearless Draft, then uh, I think that says a bit more about you than my dislike of Fearless in this particular example. But yeah, like it can definitely be a thing, right? And like you say, there are aspects of it which are completely uncontrollable. Um, it could be down to a person's cadence, a person's accent, um, just their voice overall, right? Just period. That is also a thing. It might not have anything to do with the craft. One person who I'm sure she won't mind me using her as an example, is Troublink, right? Obviously, she's from Greece. She's spent a lot of time actually here in England, so her accent is almost kind of mishmash at times, but fundamentally, love the bitch. She's very Greek, right? And one part of feedback that she would get a lot was like the accent thing. So even though by craft she is, in my opinion, one of the more sound people, in the space, that is one thing that is always going to plague her from a viewer perspective because she can't control how people feel about how she sounds, right? Um, the accent thing is something that people always go, I don't want to deal with. Or with me, sometimes people say I sound nasally, which sure, I guess. Um, I can hear it sometimes, maybe depending on what mic I'm using. Um, and that will be like a turnoff. So it really just depends person to person on how they feel about the commentary that they consume. Um, but again, like you're saying, the overall likability, whether it comes from craft or otherwise, is certainly something that can, on occasion, have impact on how people want to consume something. Again, with the rise of co-streams too, that obviously offers up another option for a lot of viewers. Um, but I don't think that by not being, let's say, agreeable or likable doesn't mean that you're reducing the value in yourself per se or a product
Yeah.
that you work in. It really depends on how you channel that and what you potentially then bring to whatever it is you're working on, right? Uh, Not to ramble too long for this question, but a perfect example of this is Monte Cristo back in the day. It might be a little bit before your time because I think you would quite literally have still been in primary school when Monty was working on the world's broadcast. But back in like season 3, 4, and 5, uh, Monty was like the devil's advocate guy, right? Um, and what that meant was a lot of people in the community did not like what Monte Cristo had to say. But you know what? Damn, damn what he said. He was bloody right, like a lot of the time. So um being agreeable isn't everything. It's really just about what you see. Um, but again, it is still something that I know some people certainly value in as a big part of their brand value overall.
Yeah, no, you're making me think of when I actually started playing League. I think I started playing in ooh, year 7.
There you go. Um, yeah, so that's what I mean. Like, there are some people who have been, because I started, I think, back end of year 8 for me, um,
Yeah,
which would, I think that sounds about right. Up at
yeah,
2014 ish.
yeah. That was
Um,
2017 for me, so about a 3-year difference.
yeah. That's just how how it is. Time is a very scary thing to look back on sometimes. Um, but yeah, again, that is like a big part of the brand thing, is not necessarily being too worried about that. If you feel like you can actually ride those waves of what you're talking about uh, in a productive way, right? That's the key word, I think, in a productive way.
Yeah, 100%. Now, I have one final closing question for you, and that
Sure.
is something I asked to every single caster that I asked before, and it's a little bit personal, differs for everyone, but if your casting journey was turned into a documentary, what was one moment that would have to be in there?
Ooh. Um. Ooh. Let me think about this. This is good. I would say. Man, there's so many moments. Okay,
It's a
sorry,
tricky
sorry,
one.
sorry. I know. Maybe editing can make this wait maybe feel a little bit shorter. Um. Okay, so the first one that comes to mind is the the weekend doing Montpellier.
Hmm.
That's definitely one thing. I think um, getting getting called to do the LEC for the first time in person um, would probably be another. And you know what? Just to add kind of like a not every moment is a happy moment. Um, Not getting the call up for MSI 2023, because I feel like that was still like at the time, like now it's not something that like bothers me particularly heavily. Um, but at the time, it definitely was, and especially because of where we were at with some of the discourse also around talent selection. And I think people care a lot less, unfortunately, from the community now. Um, but this was the time where people were a lot more vocal about the fact that, yo, like, where are the LPL casters every single year? Like, we have this awesome, talent team almost year in, year out, um, where wherein they're just kind of being ignored. Um, so, I joined the LPL. And whilst my expectations weren't necessarily to go to MSI that year, I was hoping, like, just being more realistic, I was thinking perhaps Worlds, like, play-ins at the end of 2024, because or 2023, because as I understand it, I'm pretty sure they ran it out of the Dublin facility. So it's not like I would have to be flying all the way out to Korea. So I was like, okay, that's a reasonable goal. But when I learned that London would be hosting MSI, I was like, oh man, like, that would be cool. I'm a 30-minute train ride away from the copper box. Um, so I think kind of getting that confirmation of, yeah, wow, I even though I feel like I'm probably the sharpest I've ever been craft wise, and I'd put in so much hard work, not getting the actual call up to work that event in the moment did feel quite bad. Um, but again, you're not in control, and that's what I was talking about earlier. You're not in control of who, gets to work on these events as a caster. So that's why, you know, it's important to make sure humble, hardworking, outgoing in terms of, putting yourself out there for the work that you do off air too. Um, and I wouldn't be able to tell you what factors led to me not being selected for that international, whether it was maybe a sense of we don't think he's ready or whatever it may be, because of the overall experience on tier one was still quite limited, right? That
Yeah.
was my first split at the end of the day on a tier one broadcast full time. Um, but excuse me, I just thought, like, logistically, both physically, but also like the discourse, it would have made sense. I live in the city that the event's being held
Yeah.
in. And I would say we're in dire need to have an LPL like rep on the broadcast, but I kind of
if it
tick
does
all the
happen.
boxes,
Yeah.
So, not getting that call up. I think those three things. I know you only asked for one, but I feel like I was being
No,
too
no,
picky with the first two,
three
and
is
the third
perfectly
one was,
fine.
yeah, to kind of keep it real.
I managed to think of one more funny question, and I've just got to ask it. I was going to end on that note, but I really have to ask this. How is
Yeah.
it casting mouse? I'm going to
Um,
ask.
all right. So this might not be the answer that you want to hear, but honest to God, it's frustrating because he actually just completely circumvents conventional play for one, but two, like at times thinking where it's like you'll look at a play and go, yeah, like this is effing stupid. Like, what is he doing here? Why is he doing this? And then he'll get out on 1 HP. And it's like, if that was so many other top laners in that position, they'll die. And then the play will not be worth, right? In terms of like the time investment from the enemy team. So it's fun because at the end of the day, Baus is also a very, very talented player in his own way. Um, but from a pure like analytical perspective, he's a conundrum that just seems completely unsolvable, and you just kind of have to watch it happen and not like try to think too hard
Yeah.
about the whys sometimes.
It's that aspect of being confused as a caster is okay if you just make sure that everyone knows that you are a bit confused.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Saying like, "Oh, what's he doing?" Stuff like that. But no, that is all of the questions I have for today. Thank you very much for coming on. The conversation was very fun. But if you would just like to promote yourself one more time, I'm sure there'll be an either corner down here. But go for it.
Yeah, no. First off, thank you for having me. It's been a very, very lovely chat. I started doing short form content on YouTube Shorts and the dreaded Zoomer space of TikTok. Um, but I'm kind of doing it in a way which feels a little bit closer to my old soul, where it's like I'm starting to call it middle form content because it feels like what I'm doing is I'm condensing videos that'll typically be long form and bringing them into the short form formula, and that's kind of translating into videos that are around 2.5 ish minutes. And they've been fun. I did a video on Dr. Mundo, which Aloys has been very, very popular as of late because of his antics
Push,
on the
push,
champion.
push.
Push, 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 indeed. And I have another video coming, hopefully this week. I'm not sure when this is being uploaded, so maybe by the time this is uploaded, my newest video is up. Um, but I'm actually doing a historical look back at kleptomancy because I also feel like videos of the format that I'm doing work quite well in like history terms of, hey, like let's look back at the season where mountain dragons were like completely broken. I think that sounds about roughly when you would have started, where they provided
Yeah.
true damage to
Oh,
objectives and yeah,
dude.
very, very
Oh.
not no okay. So yeah, uh that'll be my promotion. Those videos coming out kind of like a every week and a half ish basis. And then my Twitch, which is also just .tv/Jamada. I stream on there pretty regularly. Most days, like after late afternoons and evenings, is when you'll find those. So those would be my two personal little bits of self promo.
Very nice. Yeah, I was just gonna say, don't even get me started on that Mountain Dragon. Darius level 3 being able to kill it was no, but I will plug myself a little bit. You can find me at Evan Palmer on Instagram, and then Twitter is just Evan Casts. But thank you very much for coming on today. It's been quite fun, and hopefully I will see you on NLCS.
Hopefully. Thank you.